He's a billionaire who assaulted his maid. She's a ghost who just cost him $900 million. Now he's retaliated. He's destroyed her job, had her apartment tossed, and just padlocked her community center, leaving children on the street. He thinks she's broken, but he has no idea what she's about to do next. Welcome to Blissful Whispers. We're so glad you're here for this one. We love seeing how far these stories travel, so do us a huge favor and let us know in the comments right now. Where in the world are you watching from and what time is it in your city? And if you're ready to see this arrogant bully get exactly what's coming to him, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single minute of this takedown. Now, let's get into the story. Eliza Washington was a ghost. Not the spooky kind, but the kind that moves through the world without being seen, and that's exactly how she liked it. By trade, she was a maid, part of a high-end hospitality service that cleaned the homes of the city's richest people. She was meticulous, efficient, and, above all, invisible. Her uniform was a cloak, her silent movements a promise to take up no space at all. Tonight, she was working in a penthouse that felt less like a home and more like a glittering palace in the sky. The air hummed with the sound of clinking champagne glasses and the loud, confident laughter of people who owned the world. Eliza moved along the edges of the party, her small cart gliding silently over the marble floors. She wiped away smudges on the giant glass balcony doors, her face a perfect, neutral mask. Through the glass, she could see the entire city spread out below, a carpet of lights that seemed to belong to the people inside, not her. Her eyes were sharp, even if she kept them lowered. She couldn't help but notice things. She saw a tech mogul tap a code into his laptop, 8-2-0-1-1-9. She didn't know why her mind held on to details like that. It just did. She turned back to the glass, wiping away a fingerprint. Her job was to erase any sign that humans had been there. She straightened cushions, collected half-empty glasses, and wiped down counters, all while navigating around the guests who looked right through her. To them, she was just part of the furniture, something that moved. A large man, smelling of expensive scotch, stumbled out onto the balcony, talking loudly on his phone about syncing a buy order and swallowing another company's profits. He noticed Eliza only when he needed something. "Get me another one of these," he grunted, shoving his empty glass toward her without looking. "Scotch. Neat." "Yes, sir," Eliza said, her voice soft and steady. She took the glass and moved back inside, a shadow in a world of blinding light. She didn't rush. Her pace was always the same, calm, deliberate, and forgettable. This was her life, a routine she had built to protect herself. Clock in, disappear, clock out. Hours later, the heavy service door of the high-rise clicked shut behind her. Eliza leaned against the alley's brick wall, breathing in the gritty city air. It was a relief to be out of that sterile, perfumed place. She undid the top button of her uniform, letting out a long, slow breath. The mask of the polite, invisible maid finally came off, leaving behind a deep, bone-deep tiredness. The subway ride took her far away from the world of steel and glass. She got off in her own neighborhood, a place of brick buildings, rattling fire escapes, and the comforting smell of exhaust and local restaurants. She turned a corner, her steps a little quicker now. She pushed open a rattling glass door with a hand-painted sign hanging crookedly above it, Haven Tech Center. This place was the complete opposite of the penthouse. It was messy, loud, and full of life. Old, mismatched computers, all donated, lined rows of folding tables. The air buzzed with the sound of cooling fans and the fast, eager tapping of keyboards. Teenagers were huddled around the screens, some playing games, others trying to learn. This was her real home, her safe place. Maria, the center's director, looked up from a desk buried in paperwork. She looked just as tired as Eliza, but her smile was warm and real. "Long day at the palace, Liza?" Maria asked. Eliza allowed herself a small, genuine smile. "You have no idea. How are those new computer parts?" "Well," Maria sighed, "we got 3 of the 6 you rescued to work. The other 3 are, well, they make good paperweights. We're still short for the coding class." "I'll look at them this weekend," Eliza said, still in her maid's uniform, a strange sight in this room full of technology. "It might just be a bad part one can fix." She walked through the main room, heading for the exit. She just wanted to get home. The kids nodded as she passed. "Miss Liza." Then she heard a sound that made her pause, a frustrated groan and the sound of a hand hitting a desk. "Stupid. Stupid. Why isn't it working? It was Leo, one of the center's brightest kids. He was staring at his screen, completely stuck. He was working on a big project, something for a scholarship competition, and he had hit a wall. Eliza paused. She was so tired. Her feet ached. She just wanted her small apartment and a cup of tea. She took a step toward the door. But she couldn't help it. She stopped. She turned, and her gaze landed on Leo's screen from 5 feet away. She didn't walk over, just stood there, her eyes scanning the lines of computer code. A small frown touched her face. The weary maid was gone, replaced by something sharp and focused. "I'm fine, Miss Liza," Leo muttered, not looking up. "Just stuck." Eliza didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on the screen. "Your loop is inefficient," she said quietly. Leo froze and looked up, confused. This was Miss Liza, the nice lady who cleaned buildings and helped fix their old computers. "What?" "Line 42, Eliza said, her voice different now. It was flat, clear, and absolutely certain. "You're telling the computer to do the same job over and over, buried inside another job. You're asking it to run millions of operations when you only need a few thousand." Leo just stared. He had no idea what she was talking about. "You're trying to sort a giant list by making the computer check it from top to bottom millions of times? It's too slow. That's why it's crashing," she explained. "You don't need to do all that." "But how?" Leo asked, his frustration turning into curiosity. "Think of it like a phone book," Eliza said, her voice simple and clear. "You don't look for Smith by starting at and reading every single name, do you? You open it to the middle, see you're in him, and throw away the first half of the book. Then you do it again. You divide the problem and conquer it." She pointed. "Get rid of those loops. Tell the computer to split the list in half, then split the halves and keep doing that until it's simple. It's called a recursive method. It will be 1,000 times faster." The moment was over. The sharp analyst was gone and the tired maid was back. She turned to Maria. "Good night, Maria." "Good night, Liza," Maria replied with a knowing smile. Eliza walked out the door. Leo stared at the empty doorway, then back at his screen. "Divide and conquer. Split the list." He muttered. He was completely bewildered, but he started typing. He deleted his old, clunky code. He wrote a new set of instructions based on what the maid had told him. His fingers flew across the keyboard, his heart pounding with a mix of doubt and hope. He finished, took a deep breath, and hit the run button. The program, which had been crashing his computer for 3 solid hours, finished instantly. A message flashed on the screen. "Process finished in 0.04 seconds. Leo's jaw dropped. He looked at the screen. He looked at the empty doorway where the cleaning lady had just left. He looked back at his screen. The impossible result glowed back at him. This was the night of the gala. Not just any party, but the charity gala of the year, held in the grand ballroom of Thorn Tower. This was Julian Thorn's kingdom, and everyone in the room knew they were breathing his air. The sound of a live orchestra was a polite hum beneath the loud, confident laughter of billionaires, senators, and celebrities. Eliza Washington was just one of the many maids on duty, a ghost in a crisp gray uniform, moving along the gilded walls. Her job was to remain invisible. She refilled water glasses, removed empty plates, and wiped away spills, all without a sound. She kept her head down, her movements small and efficient. This was her camouflage, her armor. She saw everything and no one ever saw her. Julian Thorn was at the center of the room, holding court. He was a lion, and this was his jungle. He was tall, handsome in a cruel way, and radiated a power that made everyone around him lean in. He laughed and they laughed. He scowled and they fell silent. He was a man who had never been told no, and had built an empire on the assumption that everyone and everything was for sale, or for the taking. Then a small disaster. A well-known actress, laughing too hard at one of Thorn's jokes, gestured wildly and knocked a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray. Ice and liquid splashed onto the priceless, polished marble floor, right in the main pathway. A small, spreading puddle that threatened to trip a guest. Eliza saw it. It was her job. She moved from the wall, her small, discreet cleaning kit in hand. She was just another servant, fixing another mess. She knelt by the puddle, a silent, gray shape in a room that glittered with diamonds and black ties. She was focused on the spill, on getting it cleaned before anyone important was inconvenienced. That's when he saw her. Julian Thorne and his circle of admiring men were walking by. Thorne stopped, his eyes landing on the kneeling woman. He saw her not as a person but as a thing, an object, and he was in the mood for a little sport. A cruel, lazy smile spread across his face. He loved to show his power, and what was a maid but a perfect, powerless object to use? He deliberately stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His expensive, hand-stitched leather shoes were inches from her face. Eliza froze, keeping her eyes on the floor. She just wanted to disappear, to evaporate. "Well, what do we have here?" Thorne's voice boomed, cutting through the music and the chatter. The conversations around them immediately faltered. The room, which had been buzzing with 100 voices, began to fall silent. People turned to look. Eliza knew she was trapped. "Look at this one, gentlemen," Thorne announced, his voice full of amusement. He reached down and, with a brutal lack of care, grabbed Eliza's upper arm. His fingers dug in, a painful, bruising grip. He hauled her to her feet, pulling her so close she could smell the expensive scotch on his breath, and he slapped her cheeks. Eliza stumbled, her cleaning cloth dropping to the floor. She was now the center of attention for the entire gala, a deer in the headlights, held captive by the most powerful man in the city. "A perfect, quiet little plaything," Thorne boasted, looking around at his friends for approval. He gave her a little shake as if she were a doll. "Don't you think?" The room was dead silent. No one stepped in. No one made a sound. They were all complicit, either too scared or too impressed by his audacity to object. They just watched. Thorne had just assaulted a woman in public because he thinks his money makes him a god. He was treating a human being like an object just for a cheap, disgusting laugh. If you agree that everyone, no matter their job, deserves to be treated with basic respect and decency, hit that like button. It's a small click, but it's a stand against this kind of arrogance. Only arrogant bullies like Thorne and the people who quietly enable them would just scroll by without a second thought. Eliza looked up at him and her eyes were wide. She was trembling. Or at least she looked like she was trembling. It was a masterful performance. Thorne, delighted by her obvious fear, tightened his grip. "What's the matter, little mouse?" he sneered, leaning in closer. "Cat got your tongue?" It was then that she tripped. Her foot seemed to catch on nothing and she stumbled forward, lurching right into his chest. It all happened in a single, chaotic instant. The small metal bucket she had been carrying, the one with the clean water for wiping the floor, flew from her hand. Splash! Ice-cold water splashed all over the front of Thorne's $2,000 custom-tailored suit jacket. "Gah!" Thorne roared, a sound of pure, surprised rage. He instinctively let go of her arm to look down at his ruined suit. His friends gasped. His personal security guard, stationed 10 feet away, finally started to move, his hand going to his earpiece. For one single solitary second, every eye in that room was on Julian Thorne and his soaked, dripping jacket. But Eliza's hands were not. In that half-second of universal distraction, her left hand, which had been hidden by the bucket, moved with a speed that was inhuman. It was not the hand of a maid. It was the hand of a surgeon, a concert pianist, a master magician. Thorne's custom billion-dollar smartphone was in the outer breast pocket of his jacket, right where the water had hit. Eliza's fingers didn't even fumble. They dipped into his pocket and plucked the phone. Her thumb, already holding a tiny black device, pressed it against the phone's back. A single silent click. The phone's security key was instantly cloned. And just as fast, her hand slid the phone back into Thorne's wet pocket. The entire sequence took less time than a single heartbeat. It was a magic trick. Pluck. Clone. Replace. "You clumsy idiot!" Thorne bellowed, his face a mask of purple rage. He grabbed her arm again, not with arrogant amusement this time, but with pure, violent fury. "Get her out of here." The security guard was on her in an instant, his grip like a steel trap on her other arm. "Sir, Eliza began, her voice full of perfectly pitched, genuine-sounding terror. "You're fired," Thorne shouted, spittle flying from his mouth. "Get her out of my building. Now." She didn't have to fake the public humiliation. The guard didn't hesitate. He began to drag her, literally drag her, across the grand ballroom. Every guest, every senator, every celebrity watched her go. She was a disgrace, a clumsy maid who had ruined the king's suit. They dragged her past the orchestra, through the service doors, and threw her into a service elevator. Don't ever show your face here again, the guard snarled, jabbing the button for the basement. The heavy steel doors slid shut, sealing her in. Eliza stood there for a moment, her face a mask of shame and fear. But as the elevator began its long, silent descent, the fear vanished. The shame evaporated. Her face went perfectly, terrifyingly calm. She slowly uncurled the fingers of her left hand. There, in her palm, was the small, black cloning device. A single green light was blinking, steady and bright. She had it. The new day broke over the city with a scream. It wasn't a sound, but a jagged red line plummeting across every financial network on Earth. At 9:30 a.m., the moment the opening bell rang on Wall Street, the stock for Thorn Global went into a catastrophic, logic-defying freefall. It wasn't a dip. It wasn't a correction. It was an execution. News anchors live on air stammered in confusion. "We are watching." "I don't know what we're watching, folks." Billions are evaporating from Thorn Global's market cap. "There's no news, no SEC filing, no." "Nothing," another shouted. "This looks like a targeted algorithmic attack." In his penthouse, high above the city he owned, Julian Thorn watched the red line bleed across his 100-inch screen. He had already broken a $70,000 glass, the scotch still dripping down the wall. This wasn't a market crash. This was an insult. He was on the phone, his voice a low, lethal growl. "Find out who." "Not what?" "Oh, I want a name. I want them on their knees in this room by noon." His internal cybersecurity team, the best in the world, was in a full-blown panic. They reported back, their voices trembling. "Sir, it's a ghost. A perfect, single-use algorithm. It triggered a cascading sell-off by targeting microsecond vulnerabilities in the high-frequency trading bots. It's beautiful, sir. And it's gone. It erased itself the moment it hit its target." "What target?" Thorn roared. "That's the part, sir. It stopped. On its own. Right at 9:31 a.m. The damage is specific. The damage was $900 million. Wiped clean from his personal valuation in 60 seconds. It wasn't enough to ruin him. It wasn't even close. It was a message. It was a shot fired across his bow. It was a public, humiliating slap in the face. His teams checked everyone. His corporate rivals. His ex-wives. Hostile foreign governments. Activist hacker groups. The list was empty. Every lead was a cold, digital dead end. Thorn paced his office, his rage turning into something cold and analytical. It was too clean. It was too personal. Who had he angered? He ran through the previous day. The meetings, the calls, the gala. The maid. A tiny, impossible flicker of a thought. No, don't be ridiculous. But it was the only thing out of place. The only moment of chaos in his perfect, controlled world. "Get me the security footage from the gala," he barked at his head of security. "Ballroom. Every angle." "Sir, we all ready?" "Now." Minutes later, he was watching the footage on his giant screen. He saw himself, a king in his court. He saw the actress, the spill. He saw the maid kneel. He saw himself grab her arm. "Stop. Zoom in. Enhance quadrant 4. On her," he commanded. He watched himself pull her up, heard his own voice boasting. "A perfect, quiet little plaything. Now play it." Frame by frame. He watched the stumble. The water splashing onto his jacket. His own head turning in rage. "There," he shouted, pointing. "Her left hand. What is that? Go back." Again. They watched it again. And again. And then, frozen on the screen, was the impossible. A single frame, lasting less than 1/30th of a second. Her hand a blur. The glint of his phone. A tiny black object. The phone sliding back into his pocket. It was a magic trick. The blood drained from Thorn's face, replaced by a purple, choking rage. It wasn't a rival. It wasn't a foreign power. It was her. The mouse. The object. The clumsy, terrified little maid. She hadn't just spilled water. She had stolen his key. She had planned it. She had waited. And then this morning she had walked into the heart of his empire and set off a bomb just to spit in his eye. His humiliation was now total. He had been played expertly by a servant. He picked up his phone. His voice was no longer loud. It was quiet. It was the deadliest it had ever been. "I want her name. The maid from last night. Eliza Washington. I want her gone. No, not just fired. I want her erased. At 11 a.m. Eliza's phone rang. It was her supervisor at the hospitality service. Eliza, I don't know what you did. We've received a formal complaint from Mr. Thorne himself. You're terminated, effective immediately. Gross misconduct. Please don't list us as a reference. The line went dead. Eliza, shaken but not surprised, sat at her small kitchen table. She opened her laptop and immediately began applying for other jobs. A hotel. A different cleaning service. Anything. She had 3 interviews lined up by the afternoon. She arrived at the first, a 5-star hotel. The manager smiled, looking at her resume. You're very qualified. He turned to his computer, typed in her name. The smile vanished. I'm terribly sorry, he stammered, not looking her in the eye. The position has just been filled. The same thing happened at the next interview. And the next. By 4 p.m. her inbox was full. 3 emails, all identical. We regret to inform you that we have decided to move forward with other candidates. Thorne hadn't just fired her. He had blacklisted her. Her name was now poison in the one industry she knew how to hide in. Defeated, cold with a creeping fear, she returned to her small, 3rd-floor walk-up apartment. She put her key in the lock. It was already unlocked. Her blood turned to ice. She pushed the door open, her heart hammering against her ribs. It wasn't a burglary. It was a violation. No one had smashed her TV or stolen her laptop. Instead, a chilling, professional message had been left. Every drawer in her apartment was pulled open. Her clothes were taken from her closet and left in a neat, folded pile on her bed. The cushions from her cheap sofa were stacked on the floor. Her mattress was flipped over. Nothing was broken. Nothing was stolen. But everything had been touched. It was a cold, sterile, systematic display of power. It said, "There is no lock you have that I cannot open. There is no place you can hide." And on her kitchen table, in the exact center, was the final, terrifying signature. Meanwhile, in his penthouse, Julian Thorne was not satisfied. He had read the report from Commissioner Harris. He knew the maid had been warned off. He knew she was fired and blacklisted. He knew his men had tossed her apartment, leaving his little teabag signature. But it wasn't enough. The flash crash, that 60-second wound that had cost him nearly $1 billion, still stung. It was a public embarrassment. Warning her off didn't fix that. He wanted her to suffer. He wanted her broken so completely that she would rue the day she ever learned to think. He wanted her to understand what happens when an insect bites a god. He called in his head of security. "This Eliza Washington," Thorne said, his voice a low growl. "She's been fired. She's been warned. She's been visited. But she's not broken. Find me what she cares about. A person, a pet, a charity. I don't care. Find her vulnerability. Find her heart, and then bring it to me so I can crush it." His investigators were professionals. They didn't need long. They were already tracking her, and they saw her walk into the Haven Tech Center. They ran the center's financials. It was a failing nonprofit, barely keeping its lights on, run by a woman named Maria. It was the perfect soft target. It had no money, no power, and no one to protect it. Thorne smiled. "Unleash the lawyers," he ordered, "and get the city inspectors on the line." Eliza was in the back room of the center, her hands busy fixing a salvaged motherboard. It was calming, familiar work. She could hear the kids in the main room laughing and arguing over a game. Maria was up front, on the phone, probably begging a donor for a few $100s. It was a normal, stressful, wonderful afternoon. Then the front door opened and the laughter stopped. It wasn't a parent or another kid. It was 3 men and a woman in crisp city uniforms carrying clipboards. They looked like they had taken a wrong turn out of City Hall. "Maria Alvarez?" the lead inspector asked, his voice flat and bored. "Yes, that's me," Maria said, her face filled with confusion. "Can I help you?" "We're not due for an inspection for months. We're acting on an anonymous tip, ma'am," the lead inspector said. He was already looking around, his eyes scanning the walls, the ceiling, the floor. A report of numerous and significant safety violations. From the back room, Eliza heard those 2 words, anonymous tip. Her blood turned to ice. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that this was not a random inspection. This was him. This was the other boot dropping. What followed was not an inspection. It was a demolition. It was a carefully planned execution, and the inspectors were just reading from a script. This wiring is not up to the 2025 city code, one man said, pointing to a perfectly normal electrical outlet that had passed inspection 6 months ago. The drywall in this hallway, another muttered, tapping it. This is a 1-hour fire rating. Building code 304.1 clearly requires a 2-hour rating for a community center. This fire extinguisher's pressure gauge is 1 psi in the red, the woman announced, shaking her head with fake sadness. That's an immediate and critical violation. Are these computer workstations properly ventilated? The leader asked, running a finger under a desk. I'm seeing a significant health code infraction here. Dust accumulation. Unacceptable. Maria was frantic, her voice rising in panic. But these are donated computers. We're a non-profit. We've never had a single problem before. We can clean the dust. We can get the extinguisher recharged. That's not my concern, ma'am, the lead inspector said, not even looking at her. He was just checking boxes on his clipboard. We have, let's see, 14 separate critical violations, any one of which is grounds for immediate closure. Closure? Maria's voice broke. You can't close us down. These kids, this is their only place to go after school. We can and we are, the inspector said. He tore the sheet from his clipboard and handed it to her. This facility is hereby ordered closed, effective immediately. It is condemned. Eliza stepped out from the back room, her hands clean, her face pale. How much? She asked, her voice quiet. How much to fix these violations? The lead inspector looked at her. He saw her, and a small flicker of recognition in his eyes told Eliza he had been briefed to expect her. Given the extent of the code failures, he said, you'd need a full building rewire, new drywall installation, a commercial ventilation system. You're looking at, conservatively, $50,000 or $60,000. He knew, just as Eliza knew, that they might as well have asked for $50 million. It was a death sentence. 2 uniformed police officers, who had been waiting outside, entered the center. Sorry, folks, one said, his voice full of false sympathy. We have the official order. Everyone has to clear out. We need to lock the building. The kids were confused, then angry, then terribly sad. They were herded out onto the sidewalk like criminals. Leo, the boy she had helped, looked at Eliza, his face a mask of betrayal. Miss Liza? What's happening? Where are we supposed to go? She had no answer. They all stood on the sidewalk, a small, helpless group. Maria was sobbing, holding the bright red condemned notice in her trembling hands. The cops didn't waste any time. One of them pulled a heavy, coiled chain and a brand-new, impossibly large padlock from the trunk of his squad car. He wrapped the chain around the glass handles of the center's front door, pulling it tight. The click of the heavy padlock snapping shut echoed in the quiet street. It was a sound of absolute finality. It sounded like a jail cell door slamming shut. Eliza stared at the red notice. She stared at the new, gleaming lock. She looked at Maria, who was sliding down the brick wall, her face in her hands. She looked at the kids who were just standing there, adrift, with nowhere to go. Thorne hadn't just fired her. He hadn't just blacklisted her or scared her. He had found the one small good thing in her life, the one place she was trying to build something, not break it, and he had put a chain around its neck. He hadn't just attacked her. He had attacked her mission. He had attacked her family. The cold, analytical calm washed over her again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was a pure, cold, diamond-hard rage. He wanted her broken? He had just made the biggest mistake of his life. They met in the only place that would have them, the damp, mildew-scented basement of Maria's church, 2 blocks from the padlocked Haven Tech Center. They sat on cold, metal folding chairs, surrounded by cardboard boxes of old hymn books and forgotten holiday decorations. The air was thick with despair. Maria held the bright red, condemned notice in her hands, staring at it as if she could burn it with her eyes. She hadn't stopped crying. It's over, she whispered, her voice hoarse. Everything we built. All those kids. He just snapped his fingers and it's gone. Why would he do this to us? Leo, the teenage boy Eliza had helped, was slumped against the wall, his arms crossed. His usual bright energy was gone, replaced by a sullen, hopeless anger. Because he can, he muttered. That's why. Eliza stood by the single bare light bulb that lit the room. The guilt was a physical weight in her stomach. She had brought this down on them. She had been so careful, so invisible for years. And in one moment of letting her old self out, she had brought the wrath of a monster down on the only people she cared about. Their pain was her fault, and their hopelessness was a mirror of her own. But looking at them she felt something else too. That old cold anger. The analytical fire she had tried to smother for years. She couldn't let this be the end. She couldn't let him win. They deserved to know why this was happening. "He's not doing this to you," Eliza said, her voice cutting through the silence. Maria and Leo looked up. "He's doing this to me," Eliza continued. She took a deep, shaky breath. "Maria, Leo, I have to tell you the truth. I haven't been honest with you. This isn't random. It's not because he's just a bully. It's because he knows, he's starting to figure out what I am." Maria frowned. "What are you talking about, Liza? You're a maid. You're our friend." "I am your friend," Eliza said. "But I wasn't always a maid. I didn't just fix a few computers." She stepped into the center of the small, dim light. The mask of the quiet, invisible servant fell away. "For 8 years," Eliza said, her voice clear and hard as steel, "I was a senior forensic accountant for the Department of Justice. My specialty was white-collar crime. I didn't just hunt men like Julian Thorne. I eviscerated them. My job was to go into their digital empires, find their secret ledgers, their shell companies, their hidden accounts, and rip them apart in a courtroom. I'm the one who put the tri-state hedge fund manager in prison for life. I'm the reason 2 C-level execs from that big pharmaceutical company are rotting in a federal prison. I put monsters like him away." Leo's jaw dropped. Maria's eyes were wide with shock. "Then, why?" Leo whispered. "Why are you cleaning toilets?" "Because after that last case," Eliza said, her voice dropping, "they found out where I lived. Not Thorne's people. The other people. The ones who don't use lawyers, they use bullets. I ran. I disappeared. I became a ghost. I needed a job where no one would ever look at me twice, where I could be invisible. What's more invisible than a maid? No one ever looks at the maid." She clenched her fists. "I was safe. I was quiet. Until that night. He pushed me. He put his hands on me and I forgot. I pushed back." Maria's tears had stopped. Her grief was turning into a slow, cold rage. That stock market glitch. "That wasn't a glitch," Eliza said. "That was a warning shot. That was me telling him I'm not a plaything. And he responded by coming after you." A long silence filled the basement. Then Maria stood up. She wiped her face, and when she spoke, her voice was no longer that of a victim. "A forensic accountant," she said. "So, you know how to find his weaknesses." "I know how to find everything," Eliza stated. "He thinks he's fighting a maid. He has no idea he just picked a fight with the one person on earth who knows exactly how to burn his entire empire to the ground." "Then do it," Leo said, standing up. "What do we need?" They weren't a group of victims anymore. They were a covert investigative unit. They pooled their money, a few $100s from Maria's savings and the cash in Eliza's wallet. They went to a pawn shop and bought 2 refurbished, untraceable laptops. They set up in that damp church basement, running both machines from a single, frayed extension cord. Eliza was unchained. The mind she had kept locked away for years roared to life. "He thinks I'm a terrorist because of a flash crash," she muttered, her fingers flying across the keys. "That was just a knock on the door. Now I'm coming in." She didn't hack his firewalls, she simply walked through them. She used old Department of Justice backdoors, protocols left by her former colleagues, exploits that no corporate security team would ever even know to look for. She was inside his private servers in less than an hour. At first it was exactly what she expected: ugly, standard-issue corporate fraud. Illegal stock buybacks, shell companies in the Cayman Islands. But then she found the real crime. The central hub of his entire operation. It wasn't just random fraud. It was a single, massive parasitic scheme. She pulled up the account numbers he was draining. "Maria," she said, her voice tight. "Look at this." Maria leaned in. That's the city municipal fund." "But, that's impossible." Eliza kept digging, her fingers a blur. "Not just municipal. Oh my God. It's the public servants' pension fund." Maria stumbled back, her hand flying to her mouth. My late husband, he was a cop. His pension, My pension is in that fund. He's robbing? He's robbing us, Eliza said, her voice pure ice. He's robbing cops, teachers, firefighters, everyone. He's using Commissioner Harris to cover his tracks while he bleeds the entire city dry. I just need one more file. The final transfer ledger. The smoking gun. It's encrypted, but I'm in. It's right here. Eliza's screen flashed. File unlocked. Pension final.dat. I've got it, she whispered, her voice trembling with triumph. I've got him, Maria. I've got him. The words were barely out of her mouth when the basement door at the top of the stairs smashed open, exploding off its hinges. Police. Hands in the air. Don't move. Heavy boots thundered down the wooden steps. The small room was flooded with the blinding, disorienting beams of tactical flashlights. Before Eliza could even react, Commissioner Harris himself stepped out from behind the armed officers, his face a mask of cold, triumphant victory. He looked past Maria, his eyes locking on Eliza. Eliza Washington, he boomed, his voice echoing in the small space. You are under arrest for corporate terrorism, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and extortion. What? Maria screamed. That's insane. Tell it to the judge, Harris sneered. We've got a full confession from Mr. Thorne. How you demanded $10 million from him after you launched that flash crash attack. How you tried to frame him when he refused. We found the offshore accounts you set up. In your name. Eliza froze, the blood draining from her face. He had framed her. While she was hunting him, he had been one step ahead, planting a perfect fabricated trail of evidence that pointed directly to her. Cuff them, Harris ordered. All of them. They're co-conspirators. Officers grabbed Maria and Leo, forcing their hands behind their backs. No. We didn't do anything. Leo shouted. A large officer lunged for Eliza. She reacted. She wasn't an accountant. She wasn't a maid. She was prey. She did the only thing she could. She grabbed the heavy laptop, the one with all the proof, and threw it with all her strength at the officer's head. He roared in pain and stumbled back. In that 1 second of chaos, Eliza spun and dove for the basement's one tiny grime-covered window. She's getting away. Harris screamed. Eliza smashed her elbow through the glass, not even feeling the sharp pain as it cut her arm. She scrambled through the broken opening and fell 3 feet into the dark alley outside. She landed hard on the pavement, the sound of shouting behind her. She got to her feet and ran, disappearing into the night as the first sirens began to wail in the distance. She was no longer a ghost. She was a fugitive. Eliza didn't stop running for an hour. She plunged into the parts of the city that polite society pretends don't exist. Dark alleys, abandoned lots, finally collapsing behind a dumpster in the pre-dawn chill. Her arm was bleeding, a jagged cut from the broken basement window. She tore a strip of cloth from the bottom of her shirt and tied it, wincing. Maria and Leo, their faces confused and terrified as they were cuffed. That image was seared into her mind. They were in a holding cell, labeled as co-conspirators because of her. As the sun began to cast a sickly gray light over the city, she slipped into a 24-hour convenience store, pulling her hood low. She needed to see what she was up against. A small, blurry TV was mounted in the corner, playing the local morning news. And there on the screen was her face. It was her old employee ID photo from the cleaning service, looking blank and anonymous. The anchor was speaking in a grave, serious voice. Accused of corporate terrorism. Police are in a citywide manhunt for Eliza Washington, a disgruntled ex-employee who allegedly tried to extort $10 million from billionaire philanthropist Julian Thorne. Eliza stood frozen in the chip aisle, clutching her bleeding arm. The story was perfect. It was clean. Sources say after her demands were refused, Ms. Washington launched a flash crash attack, wiping out nearly $1 billion. She then attempted to frame Mr. Thorne to cover her tracks by fabricating evidence of pension fraud. Police acted on a tip and apprehended her small cell, but Washington, the suspected ringleader, escaped. It was a masterpiece of deception. He had taken her flash crash attack and turned it into an extortion plot. He had taken her investigation and called it fabricated evidence. Every piece of proof she had gathered in that basement was now gone, seized in the raid. The laptop, her analysis, everything. All they had now was Thorne's word against hers, and Thorne owned the police, the inspectors, and now the media. He had just painted her as a greedy, vindictive terrorist. Eliza is framed, hunted, and all alone. She has no money, no friends, and a police force bought by a billionaire is chasing her, all because that man couldn't stand being challenged by a woman he saw as his property. Hit that like button if you are rooting for her, if you believe she needs to take this monster down and burn his entire corrupt empire to the ground. She slipped back into the alley. She was a fugitive. A terrorist. Thorne had won. He had taken her life, her friends, and her mission. She sank to the pavement, the fight draining out of her. It was over. But no. Her mind, the analytical engine she couldn't turn off, was already working. The frame-up was too perfect. Thorne had planted offshore accounts in her name. He had faked extortion demands. But what couldn't he fake? What couldn't he destroy or fabricate? The answer hit her like a lightning bolt. The ledger. The real ledger. The file she had seen for only a second before the raid. The one that detailed the pension fund theft. Thorne couldn't have faked that because he needed the real one to run his criminal enterprise. And where would a man that paranoid keep his one true, irreplaceable file? Not on the cloud, she whispered to herself. Not on a network. It would be air-gapped. It would be physically disconnected from the internet, locked in the most secure place he knew. His own penthouse office. It would be on a private internal server that only he could touch. Thorne had framed her for the digital crime. The only way to beat him was with physical proof. She had to get into that penthouse. She had to get that ledger. But she couldn't just steal it. She'd be shot on sight and the evidence would die with her. She needed an ally. Not a city ally but a state one. She made her way to a pawn shop that was just opening. She sold the only thing of value she had, a small gold locket from her mother, hidden in her shoe. She got $40. She used it to buy a cheap, untraceable burner phone. She walked to the bus station, sat in the back, and dialed a number she had memorized years ago. A number that didn't go to an office but to a private cell phone. It rang twice. A sharp, no-nonsense woman's voice answered. Hines. It's Eliza Washington. Silence on the other end. Attorney General Hines had been Eliza's mentor at the Department of Justice. They hadn't spoken since Eliza disappeared into her new life. Eliza, Hines said, her voice suddenly low and urgent. What's going on? Your name is on every wire in the state. They're calling you a terrorist. I'm being framed, Eliza said, her voice flat and fast. The man I was investigating, Julian Thorne, he owns the city's police. They just arrested my friends. I'm running and I have nothing left. Thorne, Hines said, a new edge in her voice. We've been looking at his pension fund, investments, for months, but we could never get inside. We always hit a wall of bought-off city officials. I got inside, Eliza said. That's why this is happening. He's stealing the city pension fund and I have the proof. Or I can get it. What do you need? Plausible deniability. And a cleanup crew, Eliza said. I'm going into his penthouse. His private server. I'm going to get the real air-gapped ledger. I've already sent you a data packet with everything I had before the raid. It's not enough to convict, but it's enough to get you curious. Eliza, don't. That's a suicide mission. Let us handle it. You can't, Eliza said. He'll see you coming a mile away and he'll shred it. I'm still just a maid. I'm the ghost. I'm the only one who can get in. She took a breath. Here's the plan. I'm going in tonight. I'll have a 90-minute window. If you don't hear from me by midnight, consider it a dead man's switch. Release the data packet I sent you. Burn him. Burn the commissioner. Burn the whole thing to the ground even if it takes me with it. And if you do make it? Hines asked. If I call you, Eliza said, it means I have the ledger. And you need to be ready to move. I want your best, cleanest federal marshals at the base of that tower in 91 minutes. I'm going to hand-deliver you Julian Thorne. She hung up before Hines could argue. She tossed the burner phone into a passing trash truck. The clock was ticking. She had 90 minutes. The lobby of Thorne Tower was a media circus. It was 10 p.m. and Julian Thorne was doing the one thing he did better than make money, perform. Bright television lights flooded the marble expanse, turning the space into a stage. Dozens of reporters jostled for position, microphones held out like offerings. On a raised platform, Thorne was at a podium, his face a mask of grave concern. This terrorist attack, he said, his voice thrumming with false sincerity, was not just an attack on my company. It was an attack on our city, on our way of life. This disgruntled employee, Eliza Washington, is a danger to us all. No one saw the woman in the ill-fitting pantsuit slip through the chaos. Eliza kept her head down, a bulky, professional-looking camera, stolen from a local university's AV club, hanging from her neck. She looked like any other overworked, underpaid media tech. Security was focused on the front doors, checking the A-list press credentials. They barely glanced at the woman who flashed a laminated and completely fake, all-access pass and headed straight for the service corridor. She knew this building. She knew its rhythms, its blind spots. She knew the press was his shield and she was going to use it as her cover. She didn't take the main elevators. They were all controlled by Thorne's personal security. Instead, she entered the fire stairs. The sign on the wall was stark: Penthouse, 80 flights. She put her hand on the railing and began to climb. It was a grueling, punishing ascent. By the 30th floor, her legs were jelly. By the 50th, her lungs were on fire. By the 70th, she was running on pure, cold rage. The image of Maria and Leo being cuffed, their terrified, confused faces. That was her fuel. She pushed open the door to the 70th floor, the executive level. The stairwell door leading up from here was different. It was solid steel with no handle. Just a small, glowing biometric hand scanner. Thorne's personal fortress. Eliza didn't hesitate. She pulled the small, black device from her pocket, the key cloner from the gala. It was far more than just a cloner. She wedged it into the network port beneath the scanner. This wasn't a brute force attack. It was a whisper. She wasn't trying to break the lock. She was an administrator. She was a ghost in the machine. She typed on a tiny one-handed keyboard. She wasn't hacking the scanner. She was sending a signal to the building's central security hub. A signal that said, "All clear. Door 70PH is opening for routine maintenance. Disregard all alerts." The light on the scanner flickered from red to green. The heavy lock made a soft, oiled thunk. The door opened. She was in. The executive floors were silent, the plush carpet swallowing the sound of her footsteps. The air smelled like old money and citrus. She knew the guard routes. 2 men, 15-minute circuits, always walking in opposite directions. She moved from the shadow of a potted plant to the darkness of a marble alcove, her heart hammering a steady rhythm against her ribs. She reached the private elevator to the penthouse. It didn't need a key. It was keyed to Thorne's personal biometrics. But the maintenance panel beside it, that was another story. She opened it. She rerouted the signal. She called the elevator not as a guest but as a mechanic. The doors slid open. She stepped inside and hit the button for PH. Thorne's penthouse office was dark, a cavern of glass and steel, the city lights glittering far below. The only sound was the distant, muffled echo of his voice from the press conference many floors beneath her. He was still performing. She went straight to the massive, arrogant oil painting of Thorne that hung on the far wall. It was just as she'd suspected, a monument to his own ego. It was also a door. She slid it aside, revealing a titanium wall-mounted safe. She entered the code she had seen the tech bro use at the very first party. 8-2-0-1-1-9. A green light. A soft click. The safe opened. It was exactly as she predicted. Not a vast server room, but a single black external hard drive, plugged into a small, powerful laptop. The laptop was not connected to any network. It was air-gapped. This was his real ledger. His kingdom. She pulled a USB drive from her pocket and plugged it in. A small window popped up on the screen. Copying file. Pensioners final.dat. 1%. It was a massive file. Terabytes of data. Years of theft. The progress bar crept forward with agonizing slowness. 3%. 4%. Then another window. File encrypted. Enter passphrase. Eliza felt her blood run cold. She had one chance. She tried the obvious. Thorne Global. King. Julianne Thorne. Access denied. Access denied. Access denied. Final attempt before data wipe. She was going to fail. She was going to fail, and Maria and Leo would rot in jail. She stared at the screen, her mind racing. Think, Eliza, think. What had she seen? What was the one file that had led her here? The pension fund. The victims. The man who had organized the protests. The man who, after losing his life savings and his home, had. She remembered the file she'd seen in the church basement. A scanned, yellowed newspaper clipping. Pension fund leader Robert Marlowe, 74, found dead. Her fingers, slick with sweat, moved to the keyboard. This was a man who saw people as objects. A man who would use a victim's name as a trophy. She typed, Robert.Marlowe.74. She hit enter. Access granted. A cold, sickening wave washed over her. He was that much of a monster. The progress bar for the file copy immediately reappeared and began to climb. 10%. 15%. She watched the number, her entire future, the future of her friends, tied to a small, glowing percentage. 40%. 50%. 75%. 85%. The progress bar hit 89%. Ding. Eliza froze. It was the sound of the private elevator. The doors slid open. Julian Thorne stepped out, his face flush with victory from the press conference. He was holding a glass of champagne. His head of security, Milo, was right behind him. Thorne saw the open safe. He saw the glowing laptop. And he saw her. He didn't shout. He didn't even look surprised. He just smiled. A slow, cruel, victorious smile. Well, he said, stalking into the room. The terrorist herself. In my office. I must say I'm impressed. Milo drew his firearm, a sleek, black pistol, and aimed it steadily at Eliza's chest. She was trapped, the desk at her back, the 80-story drop of the window behind her. All this effort, Thorne sneered, taking a sip of his champagne. For nothing. Look at you. He gestured at her with his glass. You're trapped. You're a fugitive. And now you're a burglar caught in the act. Red-handed. Eliza's eyes darted to the screen. 95%. My, Thorne continued, savoring the moment. Trying to copy the evil ledger? So dramatic. Even if you walked out of here, which you won't, that file is useless. It's stolen property. Fruit of the poisonous tree, as my lawyers say. Inadmissible. You'd go to jail for life and I'd probably get a sternly worded letter. 99%. I've already called Commissioner Harris, by the way, Thorne said, pulling his own phone from his pocket. He's on his way up. He is very excited to finally put you in a cage. He leaned in, his voice dropping to a low, hateful growl. You just couldn't accept it, could you? You just had to push. At the end of the day, after all your little tricks, you're just a maid. A clumsy, stupid little maid. And I am a king. Yes, he said it. He's gloating, cornering her, calling her a stupid little maid, while holding all the power. He thinks he's won. If you are sick and tired of arrogant, corrupt billionaires like Thorne thinking they are untouchable, comment, justice for Eliza, right now. Let's show him what we think of bullies. The progress bar on the screen behind him hit 100%. Copy complete. Eliza slowly, deliberately ejected the USB drive. She stood up straight, her fear evaporating, replaced by that same cold, analytical calm from the night of the gala. You're right about one thing, Julian, she said, her voice quiet and clear. I was a maid. But you know what maids are good at. Thorne's smile faltered, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. We're good at listening, Eliza said. We're good at knowing exactly where all the dirt is hidden. And we're very, very good at cleaning up messes. She held up, not the USB drive, but a small, secondary burner phone from her other pocket. It was on an active call. You think this was about stealing a file, Julian? She asked. This was about getting you to talk. Thorne's face went white. You're right, Eliza said, a small, cold smile touching her lips. A stolen file is inadmissible. But a live confession? From your own mouth? On a legally warranted hot mic? That's a different story. He stammered. You're bluffing. Say hello to Attorney General Hines, Julian, Eliza said. She's been enjoying this performance for the last 10 minutes. Milo, get that phone? Thorne roared, his voice cracking with pure, undiluted panic. He lunged at her. It's too late, Eliza said, holding her hand up. That file? The one you're so worried about? It wasn't copying to this USB drive. This drive was just a decoy. The copy was uploading. Directly. To a secure server at the Department of Justice. To the SEC. And just for fun, to the New York Times. She took a step to the side as Thorne stumbled. It's gone, Julian. It's everywhere. Ding. The main elevator doors slid open. Not Commissioner Harris. 6 figures in dark blue windbreakers, U.S. Marshal, in bright yellow letters across their backs, flooded into the room, weapons raised. Thorne and Milo froze. Attorney General Hines stepped out from behind them. She was holding her own phone, its screen glowing. "Julian Thorne," she said, her voice like iron. "It's over." Julian Thorne's face was a terrible sight. The smug, cruel confidence didn't just fade, it shattered. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a gray, papery mask of pure, primal fear. He stared at Eliza, then at the calm, armed professionals who now filled his office. He had been a god for so long he didn't know how to be a man. Milo, his head of security, was a professional. He saw the badges. He saw the overwhelming force. He did not lunge. He did not shout. He slowly, deliberately placed his firearm on the desk. His war was over. "You can't," Thorne whispered, his voice a dry croak. It was all he could manage. "You can't do this. I own this city. I am this city." Attorney General Hines stepped forward, her face like granite. "Not anymore, Julian." She nodded to the lead marshal. "He's all yours." The marshal stepped up to the man who thought he was a king and pulled his hands behind his back. The sound of the heavy metal handcuffs clicking shut was the loudest sound in the 80-story room. It was the sound of a closing door. It was the sound of an empire turning to dust. "You'll regret this." Thorne shrieked as they began to lead him away, his dignity shredding with every step. "I'll have your badges. I'll have all of you." But no one was listening. His voice was just the pathetic rattling of a snake that had finally been defanged. At that exact same moment, across town, Commissioner Harris was sitting in his own top-floor office, a glass of expensive whiskey in his hand. He was waiting by the phone for the good news, a smug smile on his face, imagining that worthless maid in a cell. His office door opened. He looked up, annoyed. "What?" "I'm waiting for an important call." He stopped. These weren't his officers. These were men in dark suits with "State Investigator" printed on their vests. "Commissioner Harris?" the lead agent asked, his voice flat. "That's right," Harris blustered, standing up. "What is the meaning of this?" "Get out of my office." "Sir," the agent said, holding up a warrant, "you are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and obstruction of justice." Harris's face turned a deep, blotchy red. "This is an outrage. It's a mistake. I am the police." "We have your offshore bank records, Commissioner," the agent said, not even blinking. "We have a recording of your conversation with Eliza Washington. And, as of 10 minutes ago, we have a full confession from your boss, Julian Thorne, who has agreed to testify against you in exchange for, well, nothing really. He just wants to take you down with him." Harris's legs gave out, and he collapsed back into his expensive leather chair. It was truly, completely over. The next few days were a blur. Eliza, under the full protection of the Attorney General's office, watched the fallout on television. News anchors who had, just days before, been calling her a terrorist were now calling her a hero. The story dominated every channel. "The fall of the Thorne Empire," one anchor said gravely, "is the single largest financial scandal in this city's history." The reports were staggering. Julian Thorne's assets were frozen. His entire board of directors was indicted. His house of cards, built on decades of theft and intimidation, had been blown over. But the best news, the part that made Eliza finally truly breathe, was the resolution. "State officials," the anchor continued, "have confirmed that the billions siphoned from the city's pension fund have been seized. That money is being rerouted, and full restitution will be made to the thousands of firefighters, teachers, and police officers who were robbed." She saw a final, glorious image: Julian Thorne and Commissioner Harris, both in bright orange jumpsuits and shackles, being led into a federal courthouse. The king and his crooked knight, finally in their new, appropriate uniforms. When the news report ended, Eliza turned. The door to the waiting room opened. Maria and Leo walked out. They were free. All charges had been dropped, their names completely cleared. Maria just looked at Eliza for a long moment, her eyes filling with tears. Then she crossed the room and wrapped her arms around her. "You crazy, brilliant woman," Maria whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You did it. You actually did it." "No," Eliza said, hugging her back, her own eyes finally stinging. We did it. 1 year later. The sun streamed through the giant, floor-to-ceiling windows of a brand-new building. The air was filled with the happy, chaotic buzz of teenagers and the tapping of keyboards. The walls were bright, covered in smartboards and student art. Where the old, condemned Haven Tech Center had once stood, there was now a 3-story state-of-the-art community hub, endowed for the next 100 years by the Thorn Victims Restitution Fund. At the front of the main room, at a sleek podium, was Eliza Washington. She was no longer in a maid's uniform, nor in the rumpled clothes of a fugitive. She wore a sharp, professional suit, her hair pulled back. She was the center's new director. She looked out at the crowd. She saw Maria managing the new staff. She saw Leo, now a freshman in college, working as a teaching assistant for the coding class. She saw city officials, new ones, honest ones, applauding. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer a ghost. She had been seen and she had been heard. She had found her peace, not by hiding from the world, but by standing up and fighting for her part of it. Thorn's empire is in ashes, and the corrupt commissioner is in jail, all because one brave woman refused to stay silent. If you loved watching this takedown of a bully who thought he was untouchable, smash that subscribe button. We expose liars, cheats, and manipulators every single week. Only people who support corruption and arrogance won't subscribe. Join us.